Hey everyone, it's Raghu back with Mindrolling, and I'm really happy to be with Leonard Pickard today and to describe Leonard's importance in the culture would be quite difficult. All I can say is let's start with the reality of what psychedelic medicine means to us today in a huge way. I grew up with it when I met Ram Dass, and of course, Leary and Alpert were a big part of my life back then. And so Leonard has a major role in providing this medicine over many years. And then, of course, running afoul of the government. And he's going to tell you that whole story. But first, I just want to hear Leonard. First of all, welcome, Leonard.
Well, thank you, and lovely to be with you today. And of course, this is a most unusual listening audience for me, followers of Ram Dass and those grand traditions. But of course, I hold Ram Dass in great regard. Was at his 50th birthday celebration in Berkeley some years ago.
Oh, yeah.
We indeed a little Ram Dass story for you as we launch into it. Just before I was taken away by the government in 2000 for 20 years, I was at a gathering in Tiburon, California, a beautiful house overlooking San Francisco Bay, with all sorts of wonderful characters, attorneys, activists, researchers. It was a normal fundraiser.
Right.
And my goodness, there was Ram Dass, chairbound. And I
after his stroke.
kneeled beside him. After a stroke, I kneeled beside him and exchanged a few words and told him exactly what I was up to and my reverence for his path. And he said some very loving things. So Ram Dass effectively was the last person that I saw before the world ended, and I was taken away for 20 years.
Yeah,
so
let's
that
just
was the memory of the last
that's
person.
really good. We should say, so everybody gets it, that Leonard was producing very large quantities of LSD, and the government came down on him and whoever else, and he was sentenced and spent 20 years in jail. And we're only talking about when 2020. You've been free since 2020. So
yes, I've been free since 2020, and in the course of that event, normally of drug seizures, if you will, of that magnitude, which is a significant portion of the world supply. Generally, 100 people are arrested and that sort of thing, but the government only managed to arrest me and my dear colleague. So only two old hippies
that was
were
it.
arrested.
That's all they got.
Two old hippies, harmless old hippies, and so from the sequelae to this whole thing, which anticipated some world enterprise. We were the only two arrested.
Wow.
And so it has remained that way for a quarter of a century.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's was very pleasing and to many.
All right. Well, how did you get there? I mean, let's talk about when, real youth and what interests you to even, two things. One is how you came to obviously have this relationship with this entheogen. And that's one thing involving chemistry and so on. And then the other is the idea of transcendence, the possibility, and, the motivation for you to be involved like that. So, yeah, what were those? Was there transformation points in your teens into your early 20s?
Well, in my teens, I was raised as a Unitarian, some relatively academic gatherings in which there was no particular religious tradition that was emphasized. All were welcome. mostly researchers from Emory University, that sort of thing. Spiritual awakening really did not occur until after the 60s episodes. My first synthesis was, according to the government, was at the Retina Foundation for Experimental Biology at 21. At that point, dancing around Beacon Hill, exposing each other to this material, and Snowfall at 21. A lovely period. And then, of course, the great changes of the 60s, in which, of course, Ram Dass and Tim Leary and others were so prominent. Of course, we were just 21 years old and just beginning. And of course, then the migration to the San Francisco Bay Area, along with millions of other youth coming in to find out what's it all about.
I was one
of them. What are these changes?
I was one of them.
What are these changes we're undergoing? And no elders to talk to about it, just each other. No cell phones, no computers, just word of mouth. So millions of us, millions of people in their early 20s came to the Bay Area to hold these conversations. I can recall on the streets of LA, of long-haired youth at the time we effected these appearances to find each other, 3 or 4 people deep for miles, every evening, talking about their experiences and transformations. And the first great large gatherings outside race car events, or where 20, 30,000 people would spontaneously gather in Golden Gate Park, unannounced, no structure, just suddenly there we all are, singing and dancing and chanting and exchanging the herb, if you will. And there was a theological awakening of great magnitude, a social upheaval, unparalleled since perhaps the great religious awakenings of the 1860s, perhaps even more so.
Yeah. Do I remember it well?
Well, if you weren't there, it's really hard to describe it. I have yet to see a film or a book that really captures this essential spirit of the times.
I mean, that was mind-blowing. All of a sudden, I ended up, in Haight-Ashbury from Montreal with a couple of friends. And, the total freedom of expression and meeting mind to mind, like-minded people. I had never experienced anything like that. And that
well, we weren't our parents. Our parents were conservative. They were married, working 9 to 5, this sort of thing. And of course, we were experiencing a neurochemical challenge, a neurochemical awakening of evolutionary magnitude. We were going to change the world. The substance was going to change the world. And along with that was the realization that a transformative experience, if it is to be valid, cannot be drug dependent. It's not. It would be a terrible offense to think that such beautiful insights were dependent upon a mere substance.
Right
on. It would be a very poor joke. So many awaken into a spiritual path going, this is an essential part of human nature. The drug was just one doorway that we personally happened to step through, but it's not the drug. It's what the drug was pointing to, which was a greater, if you will, God realization or awakening into spiritual life.
Yeah.
So it was also a time of great ferment in terms of exploration into Buddhism, Hinduism, the great theologies of the time. And of course, Ram Dass was premier in all of that. If I have to compare the paths of the great leaders of the 60s, I have to honor Ram Dass's path as probably the most human and heart-centered and proper path with the greatest potential for human growth.
Yeah.
It's not the drug. It's not the drug. It is us. It is us, and the great gift of merely being alive in a benevolent universe.
Yeah, I mean, it's a unique perspective, Ram Dass, and I think the best way to say it is the human part and the honesty, the truth, and the kind of sharing that he didn't plan at all. It just happened because that's who he is, and I would say what we are trying to do, from the foundation that was created to continue his work and preserve it. And this is something everybody, by the way, on December 12th in Denver, Colorado, we're having, there is a benefit for Love, Serve, Remember Foundation that Leonard, I think we just mentioned, no, actually before we got on, we mentioned that both of us are going to take part in. Trevor Hall is going to be playing some music and Liquid Bloom and the art show. It's going to be quite a happening. Remember that in the old days? We're going to have a happening. And
even Zach Leary,
Zach Leary is going to be there.
On the panel. We're going to have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Come on down, say hello.
But what I'm trying to say is representing that purview is what this is about for us, because there'll be a whole discussion around psychedelic insight and spirituality. And you just said it all, Leonard, in terms of it is not the drug. Now, having that ineffable experience, and then what are the ways in which they are integrated into one's daily life? What are the outcomes, not the continuation of experience after experience after experience? So you beautifully said what it is that we want to present and help in this the psychedelic revolution that is currently taking place. So,
well, that's part of the beauty of psychedelics themselves is generally they are insightful to the point that they are non-addictive and self-terminating. By that I mean you come to the point where you say, I don't need this anymore, or my last experience was confusing or painful, or it's time to move on, or there is a greater reality rather than the simple, extraordinary reality shown to me by this pill. And so at that point, one steps forward into an evolutionary moment in one's life of much greater growth. I respect, of course, psychedelics as one way of having these realizations initially, or glimpse anyway. But I'm concerned, of course, about the many young people these days that will, even with psychedelics, use the easily accessible on the net, analog after analog after analog. One propionyl, one acetyl. Let's try this psychedelic. Let's try that psychedelic. That's all good. Youth tends to explore, but there should be a point early on in reverence to these particular sacraments where you say, okay, I've learned a greater understanding of the world. I've learned profound aesthetic of the beauty of the skies and the forest and of each other around the world. It's now time not to continue to explore by taking pill after pill after pill. It's time to practice
You're singing
these
our
simple
song.
teachings that we've learned. Practice. Sitting meditation, types of yoga, types of service to each other. We're all completely interconnected and totally interdependent upon each other. And it comes a point where all one does is to help another, because one is helped by so many.
Yeah.
In Buddhist tradition, before we have a meal in Buddhist, my primary training is in Soto Zen Buddhism. And before a formal meal, we bow and acknowledge those who brought it to us. The many who cultivated, say the rice, those who packaged it, those who prepared it, those who served it. The glory of the simple seed itself growing in the sunlight and air and water, and the need to cultivate and care for these majestic systems that keep us alive. That kind of understanding and comprehension and love.
Well, you know, when I saw you give that talk over Zoom at MAPS last summer, you said something, this is completely almost like very technical. Somehow you talked about, as we mentioned, and we're going to get into this now, how you got into actually manufacturing LSD, but you mentioned the strength of, you knew what was the actual strength of LSD that I somehow connected that Ram Dass got and took to India and gave to Neem Karoli Baba. And how I even thought of this just now, Leonard, is just because of what you said about it opens a door, but you've got to then, you've got what you need. You should move on and practice and integration and so on, which is, as I said, you're singing our song. But that was given, and you said it was 600 micrograms, and Ram Dass gave a few of them. Do you know this story, Tanim Karoli Baba?
I know a little bit about it. I was just talking about it the other day with a dear friend about the experience that Baba had. I believe that, correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, you probably know the story far better than I do, but as the rumor reached me, Baba suggested that, what did you feel? Oh, nothing. Of course, 600 micrograms, 600 micrograms to an average American would be quite a show. But the report was, this is merely anecdotal to me. The report was he felt nothing, and I ascribed this to his elevated consciousness in terms of having seen if you will, the mechanisms of the world, the plight of humanity, the sense of universal love, the being aware as an, if you will, light being, having seen all of this throughout his lifetime, that there was nothing that the pill could do that he could not encompass with his normal mind and heart.
Yeah.
It was just simply another experience for him.
Well, what he said
was very beautiful in a way.
Yeah, what he said, Leonard, he didn't respond to Ram Dass didn't say, "What are you feeling?" or anything like that. He wasn't in a rational. You couldn't speak to him rationally like that, anyhow. But he said, "This is good for beginner, for first time to open up. This is good for beginner." And then
I'm so glad
said,
you clarified that.
you can have darshan, meaning be in the presence, and he said, of Christ for 2 hours, but then you got to go back. Ultimately, better to feed people and love people. That is exactly what he said. And that is what Ram Dass took back. And this was, I think, after the second time.
Well, it's a very important and beautiful teaching, and thank you for sharing that on a personal level. So that's probably a higher teaching than simply saying there was no experience.
Yeah.
That you can be in the presence of Christ for a few hours, but the greater presence would simply be to care for others in one's particular ways. And of course, what greater teaching could there be than that? That reminds me of Ram Dass's 50th birthday celebration in Berkeley. I can recall coming in from a remote laboratory and, of course, being very attracted to this setting, and somehow there was a public access, and we could listen to Ram Dass speak. And he spoke of service, of seva,
Mm.
and his teaching to that large crowd, which in those days was deeply immersed in the psychedelic realm. This is the important thing. Just take this pill, take this pill, take this pill. He spoke of the greater teaching is, what does the pill lead to if you're lucky? It leads to an opening of the heart, of a sense of giving to others, because there could be no greater moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Can we switch gears, though, with Leonard, and maybe you could start talking about how in the world did you even have the, I don't know what you call proclivity to get involved with manufacturing of this particular entheogen? How did all that happen?
Well, it's interesting. My interest in my teens, the idea was to become a neuroscientist. I thought the brain and mind was the ultimate professional path. So the intention was to become a professor at a university doing research on these things. And my goodness, somehow at 21, we saw this advanced neurochemical, almost from a different universe, suddenly appear and change everything, certainly within us, within our young minds. Music changed radically. It was went from Detroit soul, bop shebop type thing, to music that no one had ever heard before. The advent, if you will, of the Beatles, the lyrics, the instruments. Oh my God, sitars! What are those? It was like an expansion of our consciousness in music and writing and politics and society, of tolerance of other faiths and people, of a serious adverse attitude toward war and war fighting. It's great marching in the streets. As part of the government's concern in making these substances illegal was seeing the social revolution of the time and worrying about how that would affect politics and governments worldwide. It was a real threat, I think, the establishment saw to young people speaking their minds, as the song goes. A privilege to live through that period of time. It was like no other.
It was like no other is right. What motivated you to start? Was it in your early 20s that you actually started experimenting, creating, manufacturing?
Yes, well, according to the government, of course, I have to do all these disavow this sort of thing, since I can't speak directly to things like that for legal reasons. But according to the government, the first experience was at 21.
Really?
1966, December of 66. At that point, of course, the world changed, not just personally and millions of minds throughout the United States and abroad. And off we went on our great explorations. And of course, then there was these 30 or 40 years of deep oppression, where research was not permitted. You cannot look at these things. You cannot understand these things. You cannot even touch them or even speak of them, or your academic career would be dust. That was quite a serious, long period of, like, the Dark Ages in legitimate research. Amazing that any type of inquiry of, respectable inquiry into any area of human consciousness would be banned by force. But it was banned by force.
Yeah.
Until, well, it still is. But there are many leaks in the dike. And so we're seeing wonderful things like Action on the Hill, in D.C. where bilateral activist groups, especially returning soldiers, speak of treating their trauma with these
Yeah.
unusual substances. And
Yeah.
the politicians generally would not listen to dancing youth from California, but they will listen to their uniformed military men. And so that's been extremely helpful in terms of moving along research. FDA has issued guidelines for therapists. Despite the Lycos debacle
Yeah.
with FDA involving MAPS, still it was heard, and that we learned a great deal from those hearings. And so the next group and the next group thereafter, likely with psilocybin, will know what to expect and be properly prepared.
Now, can I ask you? I know that you mentioned your connection to Buddhism, and that you were in the San Francisco Zen Center in the 90s. This is before you were arrested, so you had some real practice for some time before you were incarcerated, correct?
Yes, very so. It was my great privilege to be at Zen Center of San Francisco. Ho Shin Ji, Beginner's Mind Temple. That's part of the Tassajara Green Gulch Triad complex started by Suzuki Shunro. Shunro Suzuki Roshi.
Richard Baker was there too, right?
Yes, Richard Baker and quite a few luminaries. Blanche Hartman. Brother David Steindl Rost came through as well, the great Benedictine monk who later became a dear friend. He saw all the changes as well. Kobin Chino Roshi was the head monk who trained in Zen practice at the EAG, the 600-year-old monastery in Japan. Came to Zen Center and trained us in the proper practices, and also Tassajara. It was a lovely, lovely time. I was there for 700 days, wearing robes, facing the wall, meditating, preparing food, bowing endlessly, and chanting in Japanese, and learning to center through meditation the self. Very formal food practices, a period of great reverence and grounding, life-changing. And then directly from that, 2 years of that, directly into the Kennedy School of Government in Cambridge, and among entirely different thought world.
Yeah, I bet. So, so the reality is, in terms of LSD, you had finished with that by the time you were in in the Zen Center, etc.
Well, the Zen Center prefaced the 2000 lab. The Zen Center was in the 90s, and the 2000 lab was not. So, of course, during nothing like that could go on. That sort of thing, laboratory work, for example, could not go on during effectively cloistered Zen practice in the monastery.
Of course.
So I simply had my robe and a laptop and a futon and one pair of clothes for some years, and then suddenly, but due to the nature of the times and my relationship with Mark Kleiman, who was Rick Doblin's mentor at Harvard, found myself at the Kennedy School and went directly from the Zen Center to the Kennedy School, and that was quite a whirlwind of psychic changes, but still kept my practice. Here's an interesting story for you about practice in Harvard. When I first arrived, there was a department where large glass doors of people coming and going, hurrying to do these world-changing policy exercises, and lots of congressional people and heads of state and their security teams, and all this was flowing through the Kennedy School. This glass door is slam, 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 slam all day long. And just past the glass door was the chair of the department. And because of being trained in the Zen Center, I learned to not slam doors or place plates or forks on a table and clang them. I learned to place objects very carefully, reverently, as like an offering, and that includes opening a door, closing a door, no slamming. So I would open the door and just do a little turn and close it and go about my business. No big deal. No one noticed except the chair of the department. And he came out one day and said, "Leonard, where did you learn to close doors like that? You're the only person that doesn't slam the door." I said, "Well, I was in a monastery for a couple of years. I hope you don't think that's too unusual." He said, "No, I was a Jesuit priest for many years before this position, and we did the same thing in the Jesuit monastery." And welcome. So we became good friends. And he took me next door to the Kennedy School to a Benedictine monastic setting I did not know existed, right next door to the university. And it were white-robed monks with great beards, and they all came out in rows of 12 and sat facing each other. And then there were Cantabrigians, the local people, sitting there listening. And these lovely monks would sing polyphonic exchanges, Te Deum to each other back and forth. Very, very beautiful in downtown Cambridge, right next to people designing nuclear weapons and and nuclear fleet, nuclear carrier fleet escorts, and all sorts of way out policy studies. So the practice can be carried, your spiritual practice doesn't require one to be isolated, sitting cross-legged, some monk in some monastery. Your practice can come off the cushion, away from the kirtan, away from the prasad, into the world of normal people, and you carry that within you and exercise that grace from moment to moment, because that's who you are, that gentle creature that you've become. And in doing so, perhaps act as a model for others, and always learn from others as well. So,
yeah. I guess there is some the way the universe worked for you, karma, however else you want to describe that which is acting grace, shall we say, that you were given practice through living in the Zen monastery, etc., and practicing, I'm sure, before that. So that prepared you in a way, not in a way. It absolutely must have prepared you for this incarceration period of 20 years.
You're absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. I can speak to that. Well, I'm reflecting on those days.
Yeah.
Well, of course, prison is, in my case, it was a maximum security prison from the first day through 20 years until the last day. Maximum security United States penitentiary. That means the most controlled environment in the United States, the most the government can throw at you next to an electric chair. And of course, within such, our movement was controlled. We could not walk in groups of more than two. We could not stand and talk to each other through most of the walkways. We had to keep moving, walk and talk, walk and talk. We couldn't collect in groups of 3 or more without being broken up. We could only move when the bell rang every hour. and through endless metal detectors and phalanxes of guards doing pat downs and that sort of thing, with loudspeakers blasting commands, and if there were violence, occasional flashbang grenade exploding overhead, and at night searchlights just like in the movies, and 30-foot walls and great coils of razor wire, and guard towers 50 feet high with shotguns up there, and no living thing but just dirt, no animals, no plants. And within all this, 1,000 men compressed together in an acre or so, just moving back and forth 50 yards to a collection of tattered books or to the feeding area. Back and forth for 20 years. And so it was a stressful environment. There was, I saw several killings, and I lost count of the number of stabbings where there were blood trails along the path, or the flights of life, taking people out by helicopter, that kind of stuff. And of course, what does one do mentally to survive this brutal environment? And so, other than doing legal work and reading during the day endlessly, never without a book, never without a motion before the court, my personal practice really went back to relying upon the training in the monastery and one's natural proclivity to spiritual practice. Everyone has it. Even as young hippies smoking pot, one has this desire to be pure somehow, to be centered, to be connected, to refine oneself, to understand more. So the thing that really helped, other than the love of one's friends and families and the support of others, the few that remain and the few that appeared, other than that thin thread of human connection via letter or phone call, my practice was to simply continue what I'd always done, which was during the day to stop periodically throughout the day and center, stop the frenzy and the chaos and the anxiety and the pressure, and center as best one can, return to the breathing, relax, pay attention to one's posture. At night, I would always do yoga before bed to unclench the muscles that were tightened from the day. And at the end of the yoga period of unclenching musculature from the extremes of such environments, I would sit in meditation. And it was like a great blessing had descended. Because despite the walls and the firepower and the guard towers and the $100 million government complex in which I, this little bit of flesh with a pair of shower shoes and a pencil, was entombed forever, dealing with that kind of opposition, there was this clarity and peace and tranquility and absolute fearlessness, slight ray of hope, a peace that it's all going to be all right, no matter what happens. Death, the gallows, and the insurmountable opposition, the hopelessness, it's all going to be all right. That there is a light, a grace. There is a benevolent, ultimately a benevolence throughout the universe which will guide us. And so I felt that. And then, of course, just before bed, due to a Christian tradition, I would say a prayer for loved ones, friends. those that had passed away, my children curled up in bunks under the moonlight, wondering where their father was at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. Where's my father? Where's my father?
Mm.
And I thought about that a lot. And so I would pray for friends and loved ones to be taken care of and not to be in pain.
Yeah.
And somehow for guidance on the path home.
You also started to write, did you not?
Oh, yes. Yes, I started to write. We had no command. We had no control over anything whatsoever. We could not decide what to eat or where to go, or with no power at all.
Mm.
But we could still think, and we could write or paint. There was a little area where one could get a guitar and pluck a few strings, that sort of thing. In my case, I could read and write and think, and that has not been taken away. And so what does one do with the last remaining power that one has? One tends to give a little something. So to me, it was like writing a death song, if you will. I was totally hopeless. No one wins on appeal. No one.
No one.
But you keep fighting legally. I filed 1,000 motions in 20 years, one every week, some 30 or 40 pages with legal analysis, and won quite a few motions. But nothing that would change the case until the last one. So I wrote the book in part to really for my children, so that they would understand if they happened to read it one day. I was estranged from my children for many years. If they happened to read it one day, they would understand what their father went through and why he did what he did, and perhaps not see him as a criminal, some major criminal, but as a person that was as respectful as other dads, doing positive work and trying to help their family like most people. I'd hope that they would see that. It's just, of course, the path I chose was very esoteric compared to the workaday world. So I wrote the book really to describe how we lived during those years of alleged underground activity, how we moved about the earth, how we related to each other in our small, highly secure, very, very highly secure group, how we loved, how we ate and exercised and practiced, and what that life was all about, because so few have seen it, that it perhaps should be expressed, that it was not chaotic, criminal, drug-taking, cocaine-crazed hippies. It was reverent and meticulous, as pure as we could possibly do it, with a great awareness of what was being done, and great care and reverence for others. And that was the only way that it could ethically be done, because ultimately you're affecting potentially millions of hundreds of millions of minds. And that's an enormous responsibility. So the path was, as described in my book, the rose of Paracelsus, as hard as diamond. And so that was the path. So I wrote the rose like a long prose poem of very dense language. It's very Victorian in its style, probably due to the British literature I was reading constantly. It's a tour of the English language, and challenging for the reader, but really written for those that can manage it, so we can somehow, find each other.
Mm.
It took 5 years. It was written with a 4-inch pencil.
Oh, Christ. Oh,
Portions of the manuscript are hidden because of cell-to-cell searches and this sort of thing. But somehow it became published.
oh, it is published. I was going to ask you
it was
that.
published 2015. Recently was translated into Italian by
Really?
and published by the oldest house in Italy, Mondadori. And the translators were interesting. They were English professors at the University of Perugia, who were also noted Notre Dame scholars in the United States for James Joyce. They're head of the Joyce Society. They just finished doing Finnegan's Wake in Italian.
Oh, really? Oh, that's
just truly incomprehensible last few pages of Joyceisms. So I laughed and teased them that they were well positioned to translate the Rose. And so they did. It took 2 years for them to do that. And Mondadori launched it in Turin last spring. So It's available in Italian, of course, English.
Can we get so there's a link, so we have to give people a link to be able to get the book. Is that still available on Amazon, etc.?
Oh, yes. Synergetics Press publishes
I know
The
them.
Rose of Paracelsus. Yeah, Santa Fe. They're dear friends. Yeah, dear friends. I'm out there quite a lot. It's also available on Amazon and ebook and all that stuff. So
okay.
I probably will do the audio recording soon. And out there, because people like to, drive in their cars or vacuum, do housework, and The Rose is a huge book. It's 670 pages, so people like something to, so that'll be fun to do.
Yeah, and although I haven't read it, our mutual friend and someone who works for the foundation, Mangala.
Oh, yes.
She mentioned one thing I struck her, I guess, and she figured it would strike me, which is correct. Talking about the rituals of prayers and blessing before the making of LSD.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, among the larger batches, and I don't mean a few grams or even a million doses. I mean planetary scale production, hundreds of millions of doses. So at that level, you better
say a
do
prayer.
something.
Yeah,
you better pray. So some of the large scale manufacturers, Nicky Sand, for example, they are Judeo-Christian religion. People have their own religious traditions, but at the moment of transformation of swirling reagents under argon gas and under red light in rooms, so not to break the fragile molecule with sounds playing of Gregorian chant or the kirtan, candles burning, vodus burning, with all this going on. The moment of transformation occurs within 30 seconds. So you have a large glass reactor, 20 liters, and within 30 seconds, it transforms to 10 million doses of the strongest neurochemical yet known in psychedelics. And that's eventually going to go out worldwide. And so at that very unusual moment, prayers are offered that may this substance act as a healing sacrament in the minds of many. May it lift hearts and open minds to the greater love and compassion and altruism, the greater things that we can do as humankind in the future. May we cherish our existence. May we cherish the forests and the oceans. And may this be a benevolent force throughout the world. And so with that type of prayer offered in many traditions, the material comes into existence and goes out, hopefully to achieve those ends. To do it any other way would be a criminal act. And interestingly enough, there are a lot of failed batches, but we've seen all sorts of failures of laboratories where people were abusing themselves in other ways with other drugs, or they had lost the vision of what they were doing. And we've seen a lot of those batches fail because it's not simply a technical exercise of following a script in a chemistry text. It's also a spiritual exercise. And some of us think that if there's the wrong spirit, the substance doesn't come into being. So it's almost a chemical process of wrestling with one's feelings and attitude and intentions. What is one's intention in doing this? Why would one risk one's life to be isolated alone for years and to live a life of great duplicity and never be able to share these things with dear friends and others and families, but harbors a great, great secret? The stress of that and the fear of that, knowing at any time enforcement agencies would take one away forever. Why would one do that? Why would one expose oneself to that? The beauty of a spiritual practice in that regard, dear listeners, is also that it's legal. Spiritual practice. I mean, there have been times in history where you could not practice Christianity or Hinduism or what have you, but presently, spiritual practice is legal. And therefore, that in itself is a great blessing in teaching, that there is no opposition to growing one's heart.
Yeah. Hey, how about it, Leonard, if we call this podcast Spiritual Practice is Legal?
Well, maybe for a while. We'll see how the new administration feels.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God,
but I have great hope for some of the new technocrats entering the field.
Yeah.
Many of them are quite experienced in this realm. The next few years will be quite interesting.
Yes, right. That's to say the very least. Oh, so great to hang out with you, Leonard. And
yeah, it's good to see you. Good to see you. It'll be fun to hang out in Denver a little bit.
Yeah, everybody again.
Meet a bunch of new friends. Yeah.
In Denver, we're going to, by the way, we're going to show this. It's a very short film of Ram Dass's first mushroom trip.
Oh,
it's
I didn't know that existed.
Yes.
I want to see this.
Well, it's not. It's a recreation. It was done as a virtual reality, but we're going to show it in 2D because we don't have a dome. But yeah, so that'll be fun for you
so
to
much
see.
Fun.
Yeah.
And
again, everybody, December 12th in Denver. You can go to ramdas.org and see the events page. I believe it'll be there. And if not, you can just write to info@ramdas.org if you really want to know. But it's at the Kirk of the Highlands, something. It's a beautiful, oh, you'll love this too, Leonard. It's a beautiful old church that was, this is happening a lot these days. Churches no longer can afford to stay as churches, so they become something else. And in this case, a presentation place. So it's quite lovely. Again, December 12th, everybody. And Leonard, I look forward to us hanging out then. It's been such a wonderful hour to have spent with you. I really appreciate it. And thank you.
And with you, Raghu, thank you for your kindness and your gentle guidance throughout this discussion. And you evoke many memories and feelings. And I trust our listeners gained from our discussion.
Well, one thing, again, how it was all set up for you to have the practice before you had to encounter this trauma. And then I'm sure, and the resilience that was developed alongside of this practice is something for people to really pick up in this and understand, even in these kinds of situations. We have the ability to be resilient. I mean, suffering. Ram Dass used to say this: suffering brings me closer to God, and that's it's not that anyone's looking. Okay, hey, I can see, I can do this and suffer, and I'll be nothing to do with that. It's about the resilience that we have inside ourselves to be able to transform these moments that are sometimes much longer than a moment, but can transform this kind of suffering.
Thank you, Raghu.
Thank you, Leonard. Everybody, we'll see you next week on Mindrolling on Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com and take advantage of all the wonderful teachers, including, of course, Ram Dass. And we have Krishnamurti now on the network, right? Do you remember Krishnamurti? Alan Watts has been with us for a couple of years, along with Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg and Jack Kornfield. It's a great place to go. And we'll have show notes when you go on the Mindrolling page that will connect you with Leonard's book, at the very least. Ram Ram.
Take care.
Thank you.
Many blessings.
Thank
Ram
you.
Ram.